Welcome to Sketchbook Legends. I'm your artist, Paul Hostetler. Today we're going to be drawing a mummy. Since everyone pretty much knows what a mummy is, they're Egyptian, they're wrapped in bandages, they come to life, they're part of a curse, they run around and, they menace Brendan Fraser. Instead, we're going to be doing a little bit of a drawing tutorial, the likes of which I haven't actually done very much of, but I'm sure it can't really be that hard. Harkening back to the mummy's Egyptian traditions, I've decided to put mine in a sort of a doorway. I think the kind with the pointed arch is called an OG. I usually like to start out with the head of whatever character I'm drawing, doing something similar here. Since mummies are kind of rickety and they don't have much flesh, I decided that I would draw mine with a dislocated jaw. And that's why the bottom half of that head's looking kind of crooked. Anatomy is very important when drawing anything realistic. So I like to start out with really just the rib cage. It helps give the character a sense of volume. And you know exactly, starting from the rib cage, where the shoulders are, and then you can plot out from there where how the arms and the hands connect. Starting from the top, going down, we'd have to do the hips. For the same reason, got a hip bone that's sort of roughly a horizontal rectangle. This helps you work on the posture and positioning of the character. I'm doing a little contrapposto. It's a little Renaissance trick in which the shoulders and the hips are tilted in opposite directions. It makes for a more dynamic pose. Now you'll see that the femur there, coming straight out of the hips to the knee, is about the same distance as it is from the hips to the collarbone. The shin, from the knee down to the foot, is a little bit shorter than that. I screwed myself a little bit by making the hand there in perspective. The mummy's reaching out to us, so we got to take that into account. I also decided that I didn't like the placement of the head. I got everything else correctly. I gotta change the head now. Sometimes it works like that. You gotta kill your darlings, even in art. But otherwise, pretty happy with the pose I'm going for. Sort of a knock-kneed thing, staggering out. It's in character for a mummy. I'm not gonna fill in too many details. Working with my brush pen, my Kuretake brush pen here, on a Canson mixed media pad. It's a nice thick paper, it won't bleed through. And this is a nice, a pretty new pen, so you get good flow with that. After a while, these brush pens can lose some of their efficacy. You start getting a dry brush effect. Usually I put a piece of tape on the end so I can tell which ones those are. When I need a dry brush effect, I can just reach for one of those pens. I've given my mummy some sort of blank hollow eyes, some tattered rags around the rest of the head, sort of to just give it a little more evocative silhouette. You have to have some details. when you're drawing something as simple as a mummy, which is just a human form covered in bandages. You want to make your mummy unique in some way. One thing I do know about mummies is that skin shrinks after death, and especially after mummification. So I've got mouth there with the skin pulled back from the teeth, with a big spooky grimace. It's the sort of thing that might be a little bit harder to do with movie makeup, but I don't have to worry about that, so, hog wild. You'll notice I'm working pretty much from the top down, from the head to the next area, the shoulders, going to the hand next. Some artists don't work that way. Some people go from the one corner of the piece to another. Some people just do outlines and then fill in the details later. So there are a number of ways to approach a mummy. Now, a lot of people think hands are hard to draw, and that's because they've got a lot of moving pieces, and there's not necessarily a single shape that you can correlate to the shape of a hand, depending on its position. The same way you can with the head, which is, kind of a ball shape. Head is the same shape, no matter which way it's turned. It doesn't squash or stretch. Hands do, and they've got fingers, which complicate outlines. I like to think of a hand, or at least the palm, as roughly the same shape as a piece of toast. A square with volume connected to the wrist on one corner, with the fingers sticking out the opposite side. The mummy shows that a little bit more than, a normal human being would, with the addition of the bandages, which get to wrap around all the limbs and sort of accentuate the volume. And you can see wherever there's not bandages, I've drawn the mummy's skin black. I think that's historically accurate. I know that the bog mummies from Ireland and Scotland, those are kind of dyed black, but I think the Egyptian mummies also turn black from the preserving methods. And you can also tell from the Hooters there that I've decided that this mummy is going to be a lady mummy. You don't see a lot of lady mummies. There was one a little while ago in the Tom Cruise mummy movie with Sophia Boutella, I think, as the mummy. She didn't spend a lot of time being a mummy. Mostly she just looked like Sophia Boutella with some tattoos on, wearing like a raggedy bodysuit. And if you're doing that, I think it robs the mummy of some of its power, which is that it looks definitely like a dead thing. It's very important to have some bandages hanging off the mummy. Give it that raggedy, ancient sort of appearance. And you can see I was doing a thing on the torso, sort of to accentuate the rib cage there, where I had the bandages braided across the torso. And at some point I realized that's not going to work for the midriff. It would just look weird and sort of ruin the reason that I wanted to do bandages in the first place, to do a mummy, is that, when the bandages are going across, helps define the volume, the tubular nature of the human body with all its various tubes. So I just left that part blank. as if when the mummy decayed and the sort of cavity, the stomach cavity, crumbled in, the bandages crumbled along with it. When you're placing a character in a setting, it's also important compositionally to have that character interacting with the setting in some way. For me in this example, that means that the one hand, the right hand there, is actually touching the side of the door frame. It helps ground the mummy, place the mummy in, a specific area within the space. You know that the mummy's on the threshold. If it's touching the door frame, you know what size the mummy is. Otherwise, it could be a giant mummy or like a midget mummy. You wouldn't necessarily be able to tell just from the drawing. Not that the viewer would necessarily think those things, but these little shorthand rules are just there to keep the viewer from having to think about these things. And the faster that the viewer's brain can take in what it's seeing and understand it, generally the more pleasing the image is. Especially if you're making comics, you're telling a narrative, and the viewer needs to be able to understand what's going on in the picture very quickly, because they're going to be looking at the next picture in the sequence in a few seconds. One of the ways to not do that is to do what I'm doing and break up the outline, sort of with all these loose bandages. Since it's not a very complicated image, we've just got the mummy, and then it'll be dark behind her. You can create a more complicated silhouette. It may not be anatomically correct for a mummy to have hips that curvy and legs necessarily that shapely. I did try and give this mummy sort of a skinny legs when you're trying to signify something like a mummy as female, which I've decided that I wanted to. You have to pull out some shorthand, and one of the shorthands for an adult woman is for her to have wide hips. And you can see how the bandages are helping define sort of how the feet are moving, how the legs are moving, with bandages arcing upwards to show that the leg is sort of tilted towards us, and then the bandages, the lines on the bandages sort of being straight horizontally across to show that the shin of the leg is sort of straight up and down, and that the foot is planted squarely on the ground. Even simple drawings of a single character, they ought to have a focal point. One point on the drawing that leads the eye. Usually on a character drawing, you want the eye to be led to the face, which it is naturally. Human beings have an amazing ability to turn most patterns into a face. Just think about like the hood of a car or a wall socket. They look like faces. They don't look like faces, but we think they look like faces, and we can turn that melange of shapes into a face very easily. But I've also made the left hand very prominent. It's reaching out for us. It's larger than it should be. And that's the second focal point. We have a little bit of a shoulder length hair, possibly braided. Tight braids the way that the Egyptians liked them, at least in the pictures that I've seen in books. A little perspective lesson, since we're looking at the mummy from about the same height as her, in order to show that her one foot is further behind the other, we just put that higher up in the picture plane. I've got the right foot in the background there. I'm doing a little less work on that because it is in the background and therefore receives a little less detail. That's one of the ways that you can differentiate the foreground from the background, is just that anything that's further away from the viewer gets a little bit less detail. And since our mummy's none too sure on its feet, probably got a little rigor mortis, maybe the bandages were a little too tight, we have her being kind of knock-kneed also. I think of people playing zombies as being knock-kneed. They sort of stagger. If you're bow-legged, that means you're a cowboy. If you're knock-kneed, you're a zombie. Alright, I'm pretty much done with this figure. I've just got a few more details to fill in. I've got one bandage here, sort of trailing off, just to show where the mummy's been coming from. Just want to fill in some blank spots for where the bandages go and where the skin goes. I'm going with sort of a checkerboard pattern. You alternate darks and lights. It works incredibly well, just in terms of design. You think of zebras, you think of pinstripe suits, think of checkerboards. It's very iconic. It's eye-catching for a reason. And design-wise, it almost always works. And what I want to do is use some of those darks to make the falcon on her belt just a little more prominent. If you stagger the light and dark regularly over an area, it doesn't break up the silhouette. It just creates a visual pattern. If you have something light, just put some dark right next to it, and that's one of those rules of composition. Light and dark next to each other. It makes each area pop. We don't need to do a lot of work on this background, but we would like to do some. I've already established a level of detail in the mummy that is going to prove to be a pain in the ass when it comes to this, but you have to keep it similar, or else the mummy is going to look out of place. You have one kind of background, another kind of character. It'll look like a Roger Rabbit if it's not done right, where a very detailed human being is stuck in a cartoon world. So I'm taking a few shortcuts, not only with the editing, but you'll notice that I'm not drawing the edges of all the bricks. This is a little trick I picked up from Frank Frazetta. If you look at any of his fantasy ink drawings, he'll do this thing with cobblestones, where he'll only draw the part where the cobblestones come together. It's more evocative of a texture than a texture itself. And it's a really neat, time-saving shorthand. You do have to know what's going on, what the planes are, before you step in. In this case, I was not entirely sure about the planes. You can see I've had to add a few extra thick lines to make up for where I messed up the perspective. But I've also decided that this is a very, very old doorway, made in ancient times. So maybe all the pieces aren't necessarily going to be even, because ancient people would not have been able to make perfectly evenly shaped blocks of stone to fit together. I mean, that's the assumption. We know that they could and did all the time. All you have to do is look at those old Egyptian statues or the pyramids themselves to know they were kind of experts at making stones uniform size. But since I've drawn my mummy a little wonky, a little ersatz in her posture and shading and general demeanor, I figured that we can make the textures a little bit askew also. I don't know if you could hear the police siren. I'm on a busy road. Noise from the street just flies up through the window. And it is illegal in Washington, D.C. to draw mummies, so you can't be too careful. But you can also see here, there are always ways to fix mistakes without using whiteout or erasers. You can just build on top of things. A lot of the time, I feel it's the mark of a clever artist, not necessarily a good one, that they're able to work with the drawing that they've already given themselves, rather than try and erase things and start over and shoehorn the idea that they want into the drawing that they've already given themselves. And of course, I immediately start erasing things right after that. But that's because I wanted to add some China marker to this. Not actually a marker. I think it's just a high quality crayon. Mostly wax here. But I do like the texture. Gives it sort of a rough, scumbly, almost a sandstone texture. It's almost velvety. Took me a while to figure out how to make these things. I was doing charcoal, graphite, all different sorts of mediums. But I was inspired by, of all people, Robert McCloskey, who uses a combination of ink and some sort of China marker. He may have used specially textured paper. That exists. But I like it for the gentleness of application and the fact that when it's reproduced, when I scan this piece into the computer, it fades seamlessly into the black ink. When I press down real hard, it can get as dark as ink does. And you can see, now that we're in a wide position, that it's really the flat planes where that just the edges where the stones meet sort of trick really pays off. It's very evocative there. I have the mummy emerging from a dark chamber. I feel like this is also help add some volume. You can tell that if you know that the background is going to be very dark, you can bring things forward by just having them not be very dark. Had I thought this through a little better, maybe I wouldn't have made the hand black. Maybe wrap a few more bandages around those fingers so they really pop. But that's the thing with these videos. I sit down, I come up with an idea and I start drawing, really in that order. Sometimes I don't even know what I'm going to be drawing while I'm setting up the camera. One thing about China marker, or really with shading at all, is that with these middle tones, it can become muddy really quickly when you have a detailed figure and then a middle tone behind them. I'm going to have to work with that to make sure that the figure stands out from the background. And one of the ways to do that is, as you can see, to leave a little white space in between the background and the figure, sort of a halo. If done correctly, that can really make it pop. You can see I've done the halo a little bit larger on the things that are near to the viewer, like the hand, and given it no halo at all on things that are far away from the viewer, like the back leg and the right arm that's clutching the threshold. These are all just aesthetic choices, though. And I wasn't necessarily satisfied with the ones that I'd taken by the time that I finished drawing my mummy. So I went back after the camera stopped recording, let the batteries charge up a little bit. I went back and added the ink behind into the background of the mummy. Best way to make the mummy pop. It's just a solid black, it turns out. And as you can see, the ink with the little dry brush, using that the old marker, old brush pen, fades seamlessly into the China marker. And there we have a mummy. If you were drawing along, you can pause the video at any time, go back, make your own mummy decisions. If you liked this video, don't forget to click the like button. You can click the like button even if you didn't like it. Costs nothing. You can click the subscribe button if you want to see more. And you can find me elsewhere on the internet at Blue Sky for my scintillating observations and links to other people's scintillating observations. You can find me on Patreon. You can find me on Ko-Fi. If you have a few extra bucks to spread around, that's where you can put them. All three places, including here. All three places and YouTube, I'm at the handle phostetlerart. That's where to find me. Links in the description. And until next time, stay sketching, stay legendary, and I'll see you later.